You might remember Professor Elizabeth Rata because we have had her on the show on a number of occasions, but she is a university professor at Auckland University in the education department or faculty. You would have perhaps first met her along with 6 other university professors when oh gosh, I think about 6 or 7 years ago now, might have been less than that, just seems so long. They wrote a joint letter to the Listener, the New Zealand Listener of all August organisations, suggesting that Indigenous knowledge, Mātauranga Māori, may indeed help advance scientific knowledge in some ways, but it's not science. This was apparently radical at the time, and if you remember, drew the ire of a large number of people, including the pink-haired one who was leading the charge then on the time of why we should all stay at home during the COVID shutdown. Remember? Yes, that one. Then she became one of the very few academics to publicly criticise the Waipapa Tau Mātarau course, which is a compulsory indoctrination propaganda course that Auckland University first years must now undertake, including my daughter this year. Boy, are they resentful about that, paying $1,000 to be propagandised, not their particular world. But she also then got into trouble last year with the university, the Auckland University's Equity Office, whose declared purpose apparently is to achieve equity, diversity and inclusion in employment and education. But they got very upset at her, apparently, this is Professor Rata, for what they just saw as a serious error after Professor Rata had relayed to students last September in an online lecture for first-year students entitled Women in Education, that the curriculum refers to 3 sexes, where biologists would say that it's not scientific that there are 3, there are only 2 sexes. I might have to say it's received jurisprudential assent and assertion in the United Kingdom last week from their Supreme Court. Joining us to talk about this and how she got into this trouble and how she got out of it, Professor Rata joins us this morning. Professor Rata, lovely to have you on. Good morning to you.
Oh, good morning, Michael. You've surprised me a bit. I was hoping that I was going to be able to talk about the draft English curriculum.
Oh, you are going to talk about that as well. Don't worry.
Oh,
It's okay. But I was just giving you a bit of a background because I'd caught up with it over the weekend. But I just before you do that though, were you pleased with the outcome of the fact that the university apologised to you for stating the obvious?
Oh, enormously pleased, because hopefully it signals a shift away from our universities being political institutions and the move to institutional neutrality, which is what the new legislation, the Education and Training Act legislation, is aiming towards. Not there yet, but that's what we really need, our universities to be institutionally neutral, so they don't have a political position, a position on any political issues, although academics within the university will, of course, have their political positions as well as their positions informed by their scholarship. But the university should be neutral. And that's, I think, and I hope that this judgment by this decision, the apology from the Equity Office to me, is a sign that we're moving that way. But probably the most important thing is to do with the authority for knowledge. I said in my lecture that there were 2 sexes binary, male and female.
Yep.
The Equity Office, when they first approached me through my head of department, said that that was incorrect and that as a lecturer, my duty is to teach accurate knowledge. Well, of course it is. I agree with that completely. So really the issue is who has the authority to determine what is accurate knowledge? And I would argue that science does. Science in its broadest sense, to include the humanities, the social sciences, any knowledge that is developed through criticism, through being available to any group, to any individual. So they are the two excuse me, they're the two requirements for knowledge being science, that the knowledge is available to any individual, doesn't matter what your ethnic group, your sex, whatever, and that it is always provisional, meaning it's open to be criticised and to be changed. And, if you've got a university based on that notion of the authority for knowledge, then I think you've got a sound university. And hopefully that's what we're going to see Auckland and the other universities throughout the country moving back towards.
Well, I think it's a lovely polar adage for you just quietly, because they're going to need to be pushed, dragging and kicking and screaming rather than get there themselves. But nonetheless, do you think that the judgment that came out of the UK Supreme Court last week will have any effect on your campus at all when it comes to the interpretation of these issues?
Gosh, don't know. Don't know, Michael, because although obviously I'm pleased with what happened with my case, many lecturers at our universities are people who believe that research should be in the interests of political activism. And that's the serious problem. For me, research should be about truth seeking. We never get to the truth, of course, but we spend our lives seeking it through the scientific method. But if you have sufficient number of lecturers throughout all our universities who believe that their role is the complete opposite, is to promote their political views, then so I don't know.
So you
Hopefully the
see,
new legislation
well,
will.
you're suggest that new legislation now you've got me at a disadvantage now, because I'm not aware of new legislation. You are, obviously. It's probably a default in my knowledge. When's that legislation meant to be introduced, and who's got responsibility for that? Is that the Minister for Tertiary Education?
Yes, and it's Shane Retty, and it's several amendments to the Education and Training Act, which are out for consultation now. I'm not sure when the consultation period ends, but your listeners can look that up. But what the push to is towards, as I say, this institutional neutrality. That's the essential position that we need to reach, so that universities can't be used for political positions, treatyism, um, gender fluidity ideology, any ideology you want to mention.
Will that
Universities
also
should not
include,
be
for
used.
example, deciding you're going to divest your investments in, oh, I don't know, anything that was owned by an Israel company, for example?
Yeah, exactly. It's not up to universities. Must be institutionally neutral on all matters, because that then enables academics to pursue their role as in criticising and developing knowledge through critique.
You might well argue that in New Zealand as well, throughout the Western world too, I've seen that in the United States too, the UK as well, that the advance of progressivism, for want of a better word or phrase, the universities are at the forefront of that and have been for a long time. So identitarian politics, a worldview that is anti-capitalist in actual fact, at its heart, and the adoption of the kind of causes, political and ideological, that you're talking about, seem to become emanating first from our universities. How did that arrive? Because I don't recall that when I went to university as an undergraduate. I remember there were people there who thought like that, but the truth and its pursuit was considered an end in itself. Was there a particular moment in New Zealand tertiary education, because you were an insider at Elizabeth, in which you noticed that the tipping point had been reached?
Yes, no, you're right. Yes, the tipping point was when three ideologies came together. Excuse me. This would be in the 1990s. It really started to become embedded, and it was a combination of, the idealism of young Marxists And, when you're young, you're allowed to be idealistic, that's okay. But combination of that group of people moving into more senior positions, no longer students, but now becoming employed as lecturers. So you started to get a critical mass of people who had Marxist views in combination with that postmodernist idea that knowledge is relative, that there's no such thing as the scientific method, that science is in fact just a cultural product, and they called it Western, when of course it's not Western, it's universal science, it's modern science. And then the third factor was treatyism. So you get a combination of all those three movements, and with that new professional class, who were university students in the 60s and 70s. By the 90s, they had become lecturers, senior lecturers, middle management throughout our universities. And then 10, 20 years on, they are now in senior positions, senior administrators, pro-vice chancellors, vice chancellors. So they're now at the top of all our universities. So they have total power. So you're right. These ideas, these ideologies, this turn against universities as neutral, against universal knowledge, is coming from our universities, and it's because it's so totally embedded now.
And they've managed to stuff up the education system as part of it too by taking over the training of teachers, which has been a complete disaster, as we all know, too. Which is where I guess our conversation now leads to in terms of the curriculum, because I would imagine that they've been influential in the kind of people that are trained that then write English curriculums, which would have been, well, almost anathematic to them because they wouldn't like the English and they wouldn't like the idea that was so Western based. You're now or have been responsible, I think you've been involved in some way, I'm sure you'll tell me, in terms of redrafting the English curriculum. And the draft year 7 to 13 English curriculum proposes, amongst other things, compulsory Shakespeare for senior secondary school students, spelling and keyboard lessons for children at intermediate schools. And then there's a list of suggested texts, which many of us would recognise, including the World War II speeches of Winston Churchill, that wonderful poem that I learnt at school, Ozymandias, by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Um, can take me through this, please. Um, what's wrong with the current curriculum before we get to the changes that are being suggested?